My name is Josh, and I'm writing this down because I have to. I need someone else to know that what happened wasn't just a bad dream or a side effect of too much caffeine and sleep deprivation. I used to work the graveyard shift at a 24-hour gas station off a long, empty stretch of highway. You know the type, an island of buzzing fluorescent light and an ocean of darkness. I thought it was just a dead-end summer job to save money for college. I was wrong. It wasn't a dead end. It was a waiting room. And some of the customers have been waiting a very long time. Let's begin the story. Get comfortable and listen closely. The third Saturday of my summer gig was supposed to be the easiest. Saturdays were the longest shift, midnight to 8 a.m., but they were also the quietest. Less freight traffic, fewer road-weary travelers. Just me, the hum of the drink coolers, and the endless, oppressive darkness pressing against the plate glass windows of the Gas and Go. The place was a relic from the 80s, a brightly lit box dropped in the middle of nowhere. It smelled of stale coffee, pine tree air fresheners, and the faint, greasy aroma of the hot dog roller grill I was supposed to clean twice a night. From behind the counter, I had a panoramic view of the entire kingdom. 3 aisles of chips and candy, a wall of refrigerated drinks, the coffee station, and, through the windows, the 4 lonely gas pumps glowing under harsh canopy lights. Beyond that, nothing. Just miles of dark highway and even darker woods. My manager, Dale, was finishing his paperwork when I clocked in. He was an older guy with tired lines etched around his eyes and a permanent slump in his shoulders, as if he'd been carrying something heavy for decades. He slid the keys across the counter. "All right, Josh, she's all yours," he said, his voice a low rumble. "Coffee's brewed, bathrooms are, well, they're as clean as they're gonna get. Just keep busy." He paused at the door, his hand on the frame, and gave me a look I couldn't quite decipher. "Listen, just keep the coffee brewing and don't worry about the flickers. The wiring's old." He glanced towards the back of the store. "And don't waste time in the back storeroom. It's a mess, and there's nothing you need back there anyway." With that, he was gone, his beat-up sedan disappearing down the highway, leaving me completely, utterly alone. For the first hour, it was the usual routine. I wiped down the counters, restocked the K-cups, and scrolled through my phone, the profound silence broken only by the buzz of the lights and the gurgle of the coffee machine. It was a lulling, hypnotic quiet that could easily put you to sleep if you weren't careful. Then the oddities started. It began with the bell over the door, a cheerful electronic ding-dong that was supposed to announce customers. It chimed, clear as day. I looked up, expecting to see a trucker looking for a late-night snack. Nothing. The glass doors were shut tight, the parking lot empty. A shrugged off, a power surge, maybe. Like Dale said, old wiring. A little later, while I was organizing the candy bars in aisle 2, I heard it. A faint, muffled sound, like an argument happening in the next room. I couldn't make out words, just the angry, hushed tones of a man and the pleading whisper of a woman. It seemed to be coming from aisle 3. I peeked around the shelf. Empty. The sound was gone as quickly as it came. My mind immediately jumped to the vents. Maybe sound was traveling from somewhere else, though there was nowhere else for miles. The slushie machine was the weirdest part of that first hour. I was standing at the counter, watching the hypnotic swirl of the red and blue slush, when the blue side, the one labeled Blue Raspberry, whirred and gurgled to life, dispensing a small amount into the tray before shutting off again. I stared at it. The machine was old and notoriously finicky. I'd seen Dale kick it more than once. Still, it was unnerving. I cleaned up the spill, my ears straining against the silence, my brain working overtime to rationalize everything. I was just tired. It was a creepy place. My imagination was getting the better of me. Around 2:15 a.m., the bell chimed again. This time, it was real. A minivan with out-of-state plates pulled up to pump 3. A tired-looking dad came in, bought a large coffee and a bag of pretzels. He looked exhausted, his eyes bloodshot. "Have a long drive?" I asked, trying to make small talk. "You have no idea," he sighed, handing me a crumpled bill. "Just trying to get to the coast before sunrise." He paid and left. The whole transaction took maybe 90 seconds. It was a welcome break in the monotony. I watched him get back in his van and drive off, his red taillights shrinking into the void. I turned back to the counter and happened to glance at the small black and white security monitor that showed the front of the store. And my heart stopped. For just a split second, standing right where the men had been was a woman. She was faint, almost transparent, like a projection on smoke. I could see the candy rack right through her. She was wearing a simple dress, her shoulders slumped, her head was bowed. And though I couldn't hear anything, I knew with a certainty that chilled me to the bone that she was crying. Her form shimmered, a glitch in the grainy feed, and then she was gone. The monitor showed an empty, silent store. I blinked. Rubbing my eyes, I replayed the last few seconds in my head. A reflection? A trick of the light on the monitor screen? It had to be. But the image was burned into my mind. A translucent woman, weeping silently in a place she no longer was. I spent the rest of the hour staring at the monitor. My easy boredom was replaced by a new and unwelcome feeling. Fear. The quiet that followed felt different. It was no longer peaceful. It was heavy, expectant. Every creak of the building, every hum of the machinery now seemed like a prelude to something else. I tried to focus on my tasks, to push the image of the crying woman out of my head. If I could just make it to sunrise, I'd be fine. The morning light would burn all this weirdness away. My next task was stocking the chip aisle. It was the most mindless work, perfect for a tired brain. I sliced open a box of potato chips and started loading the bags onto the metal hooks, the crinkling of the plastic loud in the silence. I was halfway through a box of salt and vinegar when it hit me. It wasn't a sound or a sight. It was a feeling. A wave of pure, undiluted panic washed over me, so intense it made my knees weak. My heart hammered against my ribs, and cold sweat prickled on my forehead. It was the kind of terror you feel when you realize you're in immediate, mortal danger, the feeling of being hunted. My breath hitched, and I dropped the bag of chips. I spun around, eyes wide, expecting to see someone, something, standing right behind me. Nothing. Just the empty, brightly lit aisle. The feeling was so powerful, so alien, that I knew it wasn't mine. It was like someone had injected raw fear directly into my bloodstream. Just as the wave began to recede, leaving me shaky and nauseous, I heard it. From outside, the phantom sound of a car engine roaring to life, tires squealing on pavement as it peeled out of the parking lot at an impossible speed. I scrambled to the front window, my heart still pounding. The parking lot was, of course, completely empty. The night was still. That was the turning point. This wasn't just old wiring or my imagination anymore. Something was happening here. The rest of the night became a journey through a museum of invisible pain. The emotional echoes, as I started to call them in my head, were tied to specific parts of the store. It was like walking through invisible pockets of psychic residue. There was an old out-of-order payphone on the wall near the restrooms. As I walked past it to check the toilet paper, I was suddenly engulfed by a profound sadness, a soul-crushing wave of grief, so heavy it felt like a physical weight on my chest. I leaned against the wall, catching my breath, and for a second, I could almost hear the faint, ghostly whisper of someone receiving the worst news of their life over that dead phone line. The feeling clung to me for a minute before dissipating, leaving me feeling hollowed out. Later, while brewing a fresh pot of coffee, it happened again. I grabbed the pot, and a jolt of caffeine-fueled desperation and grim resolve shot through me. It wasn't the pleasant buzz of a morning coffee. It was the frantic, shaky energy of someone running on fumes, pushing themselves forward out of sheer necessity. It was the feeling of someone who hadn't slept in days, whose entire future depended on staying awake for another 100 miles. The feeling was so strong, I almost dropped the pot. It felt like a memory, but a memory that belonged to a stranger. These intrusive emotions were disorienting. They came and went without warning, turning the mundane landscape of the convenience store into a minefield of unseen despair. I started to understand. This station wasn't just a place for people to refuel their cars. It was a place where people stopped at their lowest, most intense moments. A place to pull over when you're running from the law, when you've just left a broken home, when you're driving to a hospital not knowing if you'll be too late. The station was a liminal space, a pause button in the middle of a crisis, and it seemed the walls were holding on to the feelings left behind. My fear slowly turned into a morbid fascination. I retreated behind the counter, my safe zone, and focused on the security monitors. The grainy, black and white screens were my window into this other layer of reality. And now that I knew what to look for, I saw them. They were always preceded by a real customer. A trucker would buy a soda, and after he left, the faint, shimmering afterimage of a frantic-looking man would appear for a few seconds by the gas pumps, pacing back and forth before vanishing. A young couple would come in to use the restroom, and after they were gone, I'd see the translucent figures of a family huddled together near the rack of road maps, looking lost and scared, their forms flickering like a dying light bulb. They were silent. They never interacted with the world. They were like degraded recordings stuck on a short, soundless loop, replaying a moment of crisis. I watched them come and go, these faint ghosts of emotion, and a horrifying thought began to creep into my mind. I was the only one here. I was the only one watching. Was my presence, my consciousness in this lonely place somehow making them easier to see? As 4 a.m. approached, the atmosphere in the station shifted again. The transient, fleeting echoes of sadness and panic began to feel like background noise compared to the new presence that was making itself known. It started on the security monitor that covered pumps 3 and 4, the ones at the far edge of the light, bordering the deepest darkness. A truck appeared on the screen. It was a vintage model, a slightly beat-up red pickup, the kind you'd see in old movies. It was just there, parked at pump 4, the darkest one. It hadn't pulled in. It had simply materialized on the feed between one flicker of the screen and the next. My first instinct was that a customer had arrived. I stood up, craning my neck to look out the main window. Nothing. The concrete slab where pump 4 stood was empty, gleaming wetly under the canopy lights. I looked back at the monitor. The red truck was still there, a solid, tangible object in the grainy black and white world of the camera. It was more real, more defined than the other echoes. The other visitors were like smoke. This truck felt like steel and rust. This echo was becoming more solid. My hand was shaking as I picked up my phone. My thumb hovered over my friend's number before I dismissed the idea. What would I say? I scrolled to my contacts and found Dale's number. I knew it was the middle of the night, but I didn't care. I needed to hear a sane voice. He answered on the fourth ring, his voice thick with sleep and annoyance. What? What's wrong? Dale, it's Josh, from the station. My voice was trembling, and I hated how weak it sounded. Something's happening here. I saw a woman. She was crying on the monitor, and there are others. And now there's this truck, a red truck, at pump 4. It's on the screen, but it's not actually there. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. The annoyance in Dell's voice was replaced by something else, a deep, profound weariness. He sighed, a heavy, rattling sound. Son, I told you not to worry about the flickers. This isn't a flicker, Dale. This is real. No, son, it's not, he said, and his tone became deadly serious, the kind of seriousness that cuts through fear. It's just the place. It's like an old tape recorder. It holds on to things. People stop here on the worst night of their lives. They leave a piece of it behind. He paused again. Listen to me, Josh. Whatever you do, don't engage. Don't talk to them. Don't look them in the eye. Don't serve them. They're not really there. You just have to ignore them. They feed on attention. You just do your job and wait for the sun to come up. Do you understand me? I think so. Good. Now don't call me again unless the place is on fire. He hung up. Don't engage. The words echoed in my head, a mantra against the rising tide of fear. They weren't real. They were just recordings. I stared at the monitor, at the phantom red truck. It sat there, silent and menacing. As I watched, the driver's side door on the monitor opened. A figure emerged. He was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a flannel shirt and dark jeans. His face was grim, set in hard lines. Even in the low-resolution feed, he looked more solid, more aware than the others. He wasn't a hazy afterimage. He was a presence. He shut the truck door and, without looking at the pumps or the nozzle, began walking directly towards the store. I froze, my blood turning to ice. Don't engage. Don't serve them. He walked with a steady, determined gait, right up to the front doors on the screen. I braced myself, my eyes darting between the monitor and the actual doors. Ding dong! The bell. The goddamn bell chimed loud and clear in the silenced door. But the doors didn't open. Nobody came in. My eyes shot back to the monitor. The man was gone, from the entrance. He was inside. I scanned the other monitors, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. There, camera 2, aisle 1. His translucent figure was walking down the aisle. Past the motor oil and the air fresheners, he moved with purpose. Unlike the other echoes who seemed trapped in a loop of their own misery, this one was on a mission. He walked to the back of the store, straight towards the wall that separated the main floor from the back storeroom, the one that Dale had warned me about. He didn't stop. He didn't open a door. He walked right through the wall and vanished from the camera's view. For a long time, I didn't move. I just stood behind the counter, a statue carved from fear. My eyes glued to the spot on the monitor where the man in the flannel shirt had disappeared. Dale's warning, "Don't waste time in the back storeroom," now sounded less like practical advice and more like a desperate plea. The man had gone there. The most solid, most aware echo in this entire haunted pit stop had gone straight to the one place I was told to avoid. Curiosity is a powerful and stupid thing. It can override even the most primal instincts of self-preservation. My shift was a little more than halfway done. I could stay behind this counter, watch the cameras, and pray for sunrise. Or I could find out what was in that room, find out what he was so drawn to. My legs felt like lead as I walked out from behind the counter. The air in the store seemed to crackle with a low-level energy, a hum of anticipation. Every step towards the back of the store felt like a step into deeper water. The door to the storeroom was unmarked, just a plain metal-faced door with a simple knob. As I reached out to touch it, I felt a distinct, unnatural cold radiating from the surface. The rest of the store was kept at a steady, air-conditioned temperature. This door was freezing, as if it were the entrance to a walk-in freezer. I turned the knob. It was unlocked. With a deep breath, I pulled it open and stepped inside. The cold hit me like a physical blow. It was a damp, biting cold that had nothing to do with refrigeration and everything to do with the absence of life and warmth. The room was larger than I expected, filled with dusty shelves holding forgotten stock, boxes of expired candy, yellowed stacks of old newspapers used for packing, ancient promotional displays for products that hadn't been sold in years. A single bare bulb hung from the ceiling, casting long, distorted shadows. The air was thick with a sense of dread. It was the source. The panic from the chip aisle, the grief from the payphone, they were just ripples. This room was the stone that had been dropped in the pond. As I ventured deeper, my footsteps echoing on the bare concrete, I saw what the man in the red truck had come for. In the far corner of the room, partially hidden behind a stack of leaky oil containers, was a stain. It was a dark, ugly blotch on the concrete floor, sprawling in a way that was disturbingly organic. And on the cinder block wall beside it, there were faint, faded spatters of the same dark color, reaching a few feet up. I didn't need a forensics kit to know what I was looking at. It was old, but it was unmistakably blood. My eyes scanned the rest of the room looking for anything else. Tucked away on a high, dusty shelf, almost completely hidden from view, was a metal lockbox. I pulled over a rickety step stool and carefully lifted it down. It was unlocked. Inside, nestled among silica packets and a half-eaten bag of beef jerky that had long since petrified, were two items. An old police scanner, the kind with crystals for the frequencies, and a spiral-bound logbook. I sat down on the stool, the cold of the room seeping into my bones, and opened the logbook. The first entry was dated over 15 years ago. The handwriting belonged to a former night clerk, a man named Arthur. Arthur's initial entries were much like my own mental notes, complaints about boredom, descriptions of the loneliness. But then his tone began to change. He started describing the quirks of the station, the phantom chimes, the disembodied sounds. He called them the echoes. He wrote about a crying woman and a panicked man who paced by the pumps. He was seeing the exact same things I was. His entries grew more frantic, the handwriting more slanted and hurried as the pages went on. He was becoming terrified, convinced the place was driving him mad. Then he started writing about the man in the red truck. October 12th. A new one tonight. Not like the others. This one feels different. He came in a red pickup. Feels heavy. October 14th. He was here again. The man in the red truck. He doesn't just fade in and out. He watches. I saw him on the camera looking right at the store. I think he sees me. The final entry was scrawled across 2 pages, the ink smudged in places as if from rain or tears. October 19th. He came inside. Not the echo, The real man, the drifter in the red truck. He was looking for money or trouble, I don't know. He was angry, said the world owed him. I told him to leave. He wouldn't. He backed me into the storeroom. He got violent. I had to. The entry cut off there, but the story was clear, hanging in the cold, dead air. The police scanner, the logbook hidden away. This wasn't a cover-up by the police, but by the station's owner. Maybe Arthur was never seen again. Maybe he called the owner who helped him clean up and get out of town. The details didn't matter. The truth was right here, stained into the concrete. A violent confrontation, a death. Right here in this room. The man in the red truck wasn't just a passive echo of a traveler in crisis. He was a powerful, traumatic imprint of a violent end. He wasn't just passing through. He was anchored to this place, to the very spot where his life, or someone else's, had been extinguished. And I had just learned his story. Knowing the story changed everything. It was like tuning a radio to the right frequency. The vague, ambient static of the haunting sharpened into a clear, terrifying broadcast. Leaving the storeroom was like surfacing from underwater. The air in the main store felt electric, buzzing with a new intensity. My knowledge had acted as an amplifier. My fear was a welcome mat. The echoes became more tangible. They started to affect the physical environment in small, impossible ways. I was standing behind the counter, trying to process what I'd read in the logbook, when the crying woman appeared again, not on the monitor this time, but in the store, standing by the coffee station. She was still translucent, a shimmering distortion in the air. But as her phantom tears fell, I saw a small, dark, wet spot appear on the linoleum floor beneath her before it quickly evaporated. She was leaving a physical trace. A short while later, the frantic pacing man from the gas pumps flickered into existence in aisle 3. His form was a blur of panicked energy. As he paced through a freestanding display of potato chips, the entire metal rack wobbled violently, and 3 bags of chips tumbled to the ground. The sound of them hitting the ground was real, solid. I had to go and pick them up, my hands trembling as I stacked them back in place. They still didn't interact with me directly. They didn't see me. They were still just recordings, but the volume had been turned up. The playback was getting stronger. Then he returned. I was behind the counter, my eyes darting between the windows in the security monitors when the bell chimed its empty welcome. I looked up to see the man in the red truck standing at the far end of aisle 1. He wasn't translucent this time. He was almost solid, the air around him seeming to warp and thicken. The fluorescent lights flickered above him as he walked. This time, he didn't go to the storeroom. He walked slowly, deliberately down the aisle, his heavy boots making no sound on the floor. And his gaze, his grim, dead gaze, was fixed directly on me. He saw me. My blood ran cold. This was different. This wasn't a loop. This was an interaction. He stopped beside a promotional display of hardware, wrenches, screwdrivers, tire irons. He reached out a hand, his ghostly fingers seeming to gain substance, to become more real as they neared an object. He picked up a heavy steel wrench. For a terrifying moment, his fingers seemed to wrap around it, the form of the wrench flickering in his semi-real hand. He held it for a moment, his eyes never leaving mine, before placing it back on the hook. The wrench clattered softly, a real sound in a silent store. It was then that the terrifying truth crashed down on me. Dale was wrong. Ignoring them wasn't enough. The station wasn't just a tape recorder. It was a repository for emotional energy, a battery. And my own strong emotions, my escalating fear, my profound loneliness in this isolated box, my anxiety about what was happening were charging it. I wasn't just an observer, I was the power source. My fear was making the echoes stronger, more real. And the man in the red truck, the strongest, most violent echo of them all, was drawn to that energy. He wasn't just replaying a memory anymore. He was feeding. He was using my fear to try and fully manifest, to perhaps finish what he started all those years ago. The line between observer and participant had just been erased. I wasn't just watching a ghost story anymore. I was in it. The hours between 5 a.m. and sunrise became a siege. The haunting was no longer a series of isolated incidents. It was a constant, suffocating assault. My role as a power source had opened the floodgates. The echoes began to appear all at once, no longer taking turns. The store filled with a silent cacophony of misery. The crying woman stood perpetually by the coffee machine, her form wavering as she wept. The frantic man paced endlessly in aisle 3, his panicked energy making the bags of chips rustle on their hooks. The lost family huddled by the map rack, their ghostly children staring with wide, empty eyes. The store was full of these looping tragedies, a silent chorus of despair, and I was the unwilling audience. But the true torment came from the man in the red truck. He was the conductor of this orchestra of pain. He now appeared frequently, always getting closer, his expression no longer just grim, but menacing. He would manifest at the end of an aisle and just stand there, watching me, his presence a crushing weight on the atmosphere. The lights would flicker and buzz whenever he was near, and the temperature would drop. Then, he started using my own fears against me. The entity, this powerful imprint of violence, was learning me. I was sitting behind the counter, trying to shrink into myself, when the small radio I used for background noise crackled to life on its own. It wasn't music that came out. It was a phantom news broadcast. The announcer's voice, tinny and distorted, detailed a horrific car crash on a highway 2 states over. It was a minor detail, something I hadn't thought about in years. But that was the highway where my best friend from high school had gotten into a serious accident. The announcer described injuries chillingly similar to the ones my friend had suffered. The broadcast was a personalized nightmare designed just for me. A few minutes later, the crying woman by the coffee machine shimmered. For a gut-wrenching moment, her face changed, morphing into a perfect, translucent image of my own mother, her expression one of deep, inconsolable sorrow. I cried out, a strangled yelp, and the image snapped back to the anonymous woman. It was a calculated, cruel blow. The entity was learning me. I was making the story worse by being here. I realized Dale's advice to not engage was impossible now. My fear was engagement. My terror was a conversation. I was trapped in a feedback loop. The more scared I became, the more real he got. The more real he got, the more scared I became. I had a choice. It was almost 7 a.m. The sun would be up soon. I could abandon the store, run out into the pre-dawn gloom, get in my car, and just drive. Leave the keys, the job, my tuition savings, all of it. Just flee and never look back. Or I could stay. I couldn't just survive the rest of the shift. That wasn't an option anymore. He was getting too strong. If I didn't do something to break the cycle, I had a terrifying feeling that he wouldn't let me leave, that he would draw enough energy from me to become a permanent resident, and maybe make me one too. Fleeing felt like cowardice, staying felt like suicide. But somewhere in my panic-addled brain, a third option began to form, a desperate, insane plan. I couldn't fight it with fear. I had to try something else. The final confrontation came just as the first hint of gray light began to soften the edges of the absolute blackness outside. The store had fallen silent. The chorus of weaker echoes had faded away, as if in deference to the main event. It was just me and him. He manifested directly in front of the counter, not 10 feet away, not in an aisle, right in front of me. He was almost completely solid now. The air around him was cold, and I could smell the faint, phantom scent of damp earth and old flannel. He looked like a real man, a tired, angry man who had been on the road too long. He stared at me, his eyes empty but filled with a terrible weight. He lifted his hand, the one that had almost picked up the wrench, and placed a single object on the counter between us. It made a soft yet heavy clink. It was a bullet, old, tarnished brass with a lead tip. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. The air was thick with dread, a silent demand. This was the final scene of his story. Violence, a confrontation. The logbook had told me he was trapped in a loop of his own violent end, and he was trying to pull me into it, to make me a character in his tragedy. The other echoes were watching from the aisles, their faint forms reappearing, a silent audience in a theater of despair. My heart was a jackhammer. Every instant screamed at me to run, to scream, to throw the hot coffee pot at him, anything. But I thought of the logbook, of the cycle of violence that had stained this place. Dell's advice was wrong, but his core idea was right. These were lost travelers. This one, the most lost of all. Giving him violence was giving him what he wanted. It was feeding the loop. I had to change the end of the story. With a deep, shuddering breath, I forced myself to look at him not as a monster, but as a customer. I broke eye contact with the menacing figure and looked down at the bullet on the counter. My hand, slick with sweat, moved towards the old cash register. I pressed the no sale button. The drawer popped open with a loud cha-ching, a sound of pure, mundane commerce that sliced through the supernatural tension. I looked back at him, meeting his dead-eyed gaze. I cleared my throat, my voice trembling but clear in the silent store. "Is that all for you tonight, sir?" The man's expression didn't change, but I felt a shift in the air, a flicker of something other than menace. Confusion. I pushed the no-sell button again, the register word. I kept my composure, playing the role I was being paid to play. I said, "You have a safe drive now," my voice gaining a little more strength. I looked him right in the eye. "It's over. You can go." I wasn't a victim. I wasn't an antagonist. I was a clerk, finishing a transaction. This act of mundane human closure, of checkout, of finality, was something his violent, looping soul had never encountered. It was a new variable in his endless equation of pain. The figure of the man stared at me. The hard, menacing lines on his face seemed to soften, to crumble under the weight of 15 years of rage. His expression morphed into one of profound confusion, and then finally, a wave of immense, soul-deep relief. He gave a single slow, tired nod. He turned without another glance and walked toward the glass doors. As he passed through the threshold, his form, once so solid, dissolved into a cloud of dust motes dancing in the first rays of dawn. Outside, the phantom red truck that had been parked in my mind's eye all night faded away into the growing light, for good. One by one, the other echoes in the store, the crying woman, the frantic man, the lost family, turned their translucent faces towards the door, and then, like smoke in the wind, they simply vanished. The sun rose. The orange and pink light streamed through the front windows, banishing the last of the shadows. And the gas station felt quiet. Not the heavy, expectant quiet of the night, but a true, peaceful silence. It was just a normal, slightly grimy, empty building. The oppressive atmosphere was gone, lifted like a fever. I was left shaking behind the counter, my body thrumming with leftover adrenaline, but a profound sense of peace settled over me. The air smelled like coffee and disinfected again, and nothing more. At 8:01 a.m., Dale's sedan pulled into the parking lot. He walked in carrying his morning coffee, ready to start his shift. He stopped dead just inside the door. He didn't look at the shells or the coffee pots. He looked at me. He surveyed my pale, exhausted face, the dark circles under my eyes, and the strange calm that I couldn't hide. He looked around the empty store, and I could see him feel the change in the air. He knew. He didn't ask for details. He didn't ask about the man in the truck or the logbook I had left on the counter. He just walked up, looked me in the eye, and asked a simple question. Quiet night? I managed a small, tired smile. I nodded. Yeah, Dale, real quiet. A look of what I can only describe as deep, weary gratitude passed over his face. He nodded slowly. Go home, son, he said, his voice softer than I'd ever heard it. Get some sleep. We'll find a new night guy. I didn't argue. I took off my work vest, dropped the keys on the counter, and walked out into the bright, beautiful morning. The world felt brand new. As I drove away, I saw the gas and go in my rearview mirror, looking perfectly ordinary in the sunlight. Just another stop on the highway. A few miles down the road, I pulled over onto the shoulder. I just sat there for a while, watching the normal, everyday traffic go by. Trucks, families in minivans, couples in sedans. A world of people going somewhere, no longer stuck in a loop. This is the end of my story. I'm finishing this on my laptop, back in my dorm room, 100 miles away from that place. I never went back. I don't know if I banished a ghost or just helped a lost soul clock out for the last time. All I know is that some places are more than just places. They're waiting rooms. And if you work the midnight shift, you'd better be careful who you serve. I hit post, fade to black. Enjoyed the story? Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more. We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below.